Welcome to Corporate Warrior, the podcast that brings you the best advice on how to improve your health, optimize performance, and maximize productivity. With your host, Lawrence Neal.
Hi there, welcome to another Corporate Warrior podcast. This time I interview health and fitness genius Skyler Tanner. For all the show notes, books and resources, go to 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/Skyler-Tanner. That's 15minutecorporatewarrior.com/Skyler-Tanner. And for more interviews with exercise experts like Dr. Doug McGuff, Drew Bay, Bill Day Simone, and Dr. James Still, and many more, check out 15minutecorporatewarrior.com. This podcast is brought to you by hituni.com. That's HITUNI.com. This is an online personal training course that gives you all the knowledge and know-how to become a top-level, high-intensity training personal trainer and build a successful business. To get a 10% discount on your course, type in the discount code CW10, that's number 10. Just like to say, thank you so much for all your support and listening to the episodes today. I've had some fantastic feedback, and please do send all of your comments and thoughts and people you'd like me to interview to info@15minutecorporatewarrior.com. Enjoy. So Skyler Tanner, you hold a master's in exercise science. You have been a fitness and nutrition coach for 15 years. You've lectured on various different platforms: Ancestral Health Symposium 2011, the 21 Convention on, I think, at least 2 occasions. And
we're up to 3 now.
Oh, great, excellent. And you presented at the Paleo FX twice as well, or is that more? We're still
No. It'll be the 4th time now later this month.
Excellent, cool. Okay. Yeah. What else is there that I learned about you? Oh yeah, and you also had your strength training and biomarkers of aging presentation featured on Dr. McCullough's website, which I didn't realize, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And you've. I guess the reason I found out about you is obviously talking to the likes of James Fisher and James Still, etc. They talk very highly of you, and after watching some of your stuff, it was sort of very apparent to me that you really know what you're talking about, and you're really one of the pioneers in this field. So it's awesome to get you on the show and to ask you some questions. You have this amazing blog called Exercise Science in the Real World, which is awesome. I just wanted to know, is it a big success for you, I assume?
I mean, if you look at the writings, I think for a lot of people, they set out to make a blog or not a lot of people. I think about what blogs were originally meant for. It was almost like, it was exactly like a weblog, a log, a personal journal that you hoped someone would find some amount of utility in. And actually, it was funny. I can remember actually getting the domain years and years ago, and it was almost like, well, I need to get Skyler Tanner before somebody else does.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that was probably a good play, because there's a lawyer there's a lawyer in America with my name about my age, and so I guess I got it before he did. And it hasn't been a success, and I haven't tried to monetize it anyway. I mean, I've had some really great sort of personal coaching clients through that, whether it's sort of taking their appeal, or they like the appeal of a high intensity training or a brief and to the point type of training modality, and what and then they inevitably reach a wall, because as simple as it seems, where it's like, okay, move slow and do that until you can't move anymore, but in good form. That is really, it's an equipment and it's an environment driven protocol. So what I've managed to kind of make some success for myself, if I want to call it that, through my blog, is helping people who don't have the right environment and who don't have the right equipment take and get as much out of the protocol as possible without me standing over their shoulder and making adjustments in real time. So in that sense, it's been a success. And it's been a success, too, in helping me over the years to not maintain stasis with my thoughts, being able to go back and look at what I had written before. And I've always maintained that every year you should look back and think, boy, last year I was just an idiot. As you get older, you hope that gap closes, right? Like you're learning more and you hope that or rather the gap closes about subjects you've been studying for a while. You'll pick up new habits, and next year you'll feel like a complete nincompoop the year before. But that's to say, you're learning more and more about less and less, but that less and less is, that's where the money is for some people. Like, how do you explain something that's subtle in a way that makes it really click with people? And that's hard to do. So looking back at things I've written allows me to clarify my thinking and explanations today or tomorrow. Cool. And so I like that. I mean, that's what it's, I don't write on it unless I feel really motivated to. Going back to my point, because I don't monetize it, right? I don't have to keep a web presence through that medium. It's a adjunctive to what I do rather than the sole thing that I do.
But do you, because you have a page on there where you sell courses dependent on the person's goals, and so there is a monetization piece there, is there not?
Yeah, there is, and it's funny because I just put that up there, right? Not just as in a couple of weeks, but I put that up there. I'd seen what some other people are doing, and I said, hey, I've got the credentials, but I think I have one blog post saying, hey, if you want to hire me, here are my rates. But for the most part, it's just been like a little email contact here and there, or people have just reached out to me because they saw me, they read about me through Mercolo's website, or they saw me on the 21 convention or a PaleoFX or Ancestral Health Symposium talk. And, it's nice to be modified. My time is money, but at the same time, I have not pushed it for the reasons mentioned before. It's there if a person wants it, and I'm happy to help. But it's not something that I'm beating the drum about in every blog post. Like, hey, if you want to learn more about what I just wrote about, just sign up above. It's just not. It's not my personality. It's either. Yeah. Sorry
to interrupt. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's just not my personality. Either something's a clear value and you want more, or I try and be thorough with what I'm talking about, and you've found that valuable, and that's enough, and that's fine either way. Like I said, it's not what I'm getting paid for. I mean, it's not my day job.
Sure. That's really interesting because I get James Still said it, and I get the same feeling from James Fisher as well, that they're very passionate, obviously, about evidence-based exercise and the very subject of exercise and exploring that. And they're not so much driven by money and driven by being successful in terms of business sense. Why is that the same with you? Would you say you just love what you do, you're passionate about it, that comes first for you, and you're less interested in being a millionaire, let's say?
Yeah, yeah. My parents were. I mean, my dad was a janitor and like a grease monkey. I mean, he's owned over 100 cars in his life.
Oh wow!
He had a garage that he called Middle Class Customs in Southern California. My mom, she was a model, and she was, sold, eventually became an executive assistant. So I've got like very blue collar upbringing. So to me, it was like, as soon as I surpassed, my mom was actually the primary breadwinner. And as soon as I kind of surpassed that number, it was like, all right, from that standpoint, it was like, all right, I'm good. Now having kids, it sort of moves the goalpost a little bit, because it's not money for the sake of money. It's money for the sake of raising a family and having the latitude to support them. Yeah. So I have to be more conscious of that now. But the chasing successes, or I have a client who's worth somewhere around $60 million American dollars, and he always talked about it like money, like a score in a video game to him. Like, he had that personality. For me, I'm very risk averse, So for me, it was always about saving and acquiring and chasing in a low-risk environment. And to some degree, that's a lower reward outcome. And that's okay, right? As I get older and have to support my kids, I have to pay attention to that more. But if you caught me at one of these conferences around this, I didn't hit you up monetarily. Well, you got to pay for my time, bud, because I like talking about this stuff. Yeah. I'm happy to talk very generally or even specifically about people, but not to their specific situation. That would have some amount of cost to it. But yeah, I just will talk all day about this stuff, because it's always kind of turning. You wake up and the brain snaps on and it just goes. Yeah. And you sort of have to talk it back to sleep at night. It's always somewhere around exercise or physiology, or how can I make X, Y, and Z happen for myself or my clients, or how can I deliver this better?
Okay.
So
very cool.
Yeah.
So your most recent post on your website talked about your different methods of working out and the different types of movement that you do.
Sure.
And it would appear that you've kind of transitioned away from infrequent high-intensity strength training. Tell me about that. Why did you decide to do that, and what does your workout regimen look like now for you?
So there's a little background to that whole component. There's an old post that I had written where I talked about, it was a 6-year itch, which I still think is my most...
That's a great post. Wonderful.
Everybody likes it, and I've continued to add to it over the years. And I'm not the only one. I mean, there's a number of individuals who have plenty to say about genetics as it pertains to bodybuilding. And I mean, I got into this originally for sport. I played basketball in high school. I did some track. I was introduced to high-intensity strength training through this old football coach in the community I grew up in Arizona, who is the only guy I know to have a football field named after him. He took this American high school in Mexico City to 3 national championships. The Mexican kids were kicking the snot out of the kids who were there with diplomats or, foreign workers in Mexico City, and he turned them into 3-time national champions. So they named the football field after him all these years later. And he trained me for free, and it certainly made me a better athlete, the infrequent training. And one of the things that there's some context involved in infrequent and high-intensity training is that over the years, as evidenced by that post, I've gone from higher frequency to much lower frequency and everything in between, depending on life circumstances, depending on curiosities, because you can go into a higher frequency and make it work. I mean, part of the reason why a lower frequency, high-intensity training modality is that it accounts for protein synthesis in the muscle tissue. That's back to baseline at about 48 hours. Like, the tissue is recovered for the most part. There are some studies that will show up to 7 days, but they're bludgeoning people with like 20 sets of eccentrics. Like, it's just not something you would willingly walk into a gym and be like, yep, I want to hurt for the next week. 17-year-olds do that because pain somehow associates with progress, and they have the physiology to where you basically, whatever you can shove down their neck will get turned into muscle tissue. I mean, you don't realize just how beautiful the environment was for growth at that age until you're past it. You're like, son of a bitch, man! I could have done so much better, But of course, that's the whole point. Like, life has those cycles where you come back and recounter something that you had seen before, and you're like, if I'd only known then what I know now. So, I was playing a lot of basketball, right? So high intensity training was awesome for that, in the sense of, I needed to spend much more time working on jump shots and free throws and posting up and all the other fun stuff that came with the territory. Strength training once a week was really valuable.
Sure.
And then it was great too, coming out of basketball, just cutting all that volume. All of a sudden there's like catch-up growth, right? All this stuff that probably had been stimulated, and it was just kind of tamped down by all the total volume of athletic things I was doing. And then at some point I went almost pure powerlifter after doing HIIT for a long period of time, many years. Yeah. And still teaching that way, because most of my clients, and here's where it comes to the context, most of my clients are hardworking professionals. They're traveling. I train 3 physicians today, right? So they've got other things they're doing with their time. Part of the movement component that I've added in is to make up for the fact that simply most people will focus entirely on strength and not movement quality. Now, that doesn't mean become an acrobat. That doesn't mean that you have to have the flexibility of a contortionist. What it does mean, though, is that strengthening a body that has junky movement patterns or positions, like the desk jockey posture, you can make those rhomboids, lats, lower trapezius, all much stronger. But it's a bit like farting against a hurricane if the rest of your day is spent in this kind of bent over bad posture, right? At the end of the day, all that strength is yes, it's making the actual ability to contract the tissue stronger, but you're not correcting the posture. So you put yourself at risk of using a lot more force from that stronger muscle to injure yourself if you put yourself in a position that you don't have the flexibility for. And that was kind of the early promise of some of that's how I was taught. And when I first became, way back when there was a super slow exercise guild, and Super Slow Certified, it was like you were discouraging some amount of activity from your trainees because you wanted to facilitate recovery. There's a double PhD guy, a guy by the name of Ben Bocciccio in Phoenix, Arizona. They call him Dr. Benbow. I mean, I believe he worked at Nautilus. He has a PhD in exercise physiology and I want to say kinesiology. Mm-hmm. And he jokes like, some of these people, they talk about it like, all right, you work out and then you spend the rest of the week in a hyperbaric chamber because that's going to get you the recovery you want. And that's just kind of taking the idea to ground. I think most of us have swung back in the other direction that as you get stronger, there's going to be an urge to move, especially if you've been an athlete and you're like, sure. You know what to do with that. I think some people who've never been athletic are inherently drawn to this type of programming. It's less intimidating because you don't have a bunch of like alpha athletes running around who aren't trying to be intimidating. They're just doing the thing they like to do. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have plenty of friends who work out way more than I do. And they're just itching. They can't sit still.
Sure.
I have no problem taking naps. Like I like relaxing, but I also see that one session is enough to strengthen the tissues, improve the physiology, give you longevity and injury resistance. But I think there's a need to pay attention to how you move and making some subtle improvements. Not contortionist level, but if you can't get into a position and you're forced into it, you're going to get injured. So some of that movement stuff is not to failure. I mean, you have to kind of remove a hit mentality from that. It's not, it's done more frequently so that like any skill, when you were in school, you didn't write a line of A's once a week. Mm. You drilled it until it was second nature, and then you didn't have to worry about it anymore. Similarly, with things, that's like a physiotherapist idea is if you've got a junky movement pattern, you need to practice it with some regularity until it's better, and then you don't have to do it so much. And so my point is largely that a lot of these guys think they have a free lunch. Like if I just do if I work really, really hard within the same time constraint, if I try and increase the size of the cup, then magic, like it just will fix everything. And for some people, it fixes a lot. But my point is that you can't neglect how you move the rest of the week. And you're probably going to have to pay attention to improving that quality and awareness of your body and space. And so, that idea is there. It just came. I just don't see it a lot in the HIIT community because the assumption is you get strong and it fixes everything, right? It just happens. My point is that I've got 16 years of watching clients. It doesn't just happen for but a small bit of people. In Austin, Texas, the culture facilitates an increase in movement, but it's normally sport related, right? Hike and bike trails, a lot of cycling. Every other week there's a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon run, and it's clogging up the streets.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's a culture that facilitates movement, but I know not everybody has that, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
So it's something that needs to be paid attention to at least a little bit. And I mean, I found all sorts of things kind of that I hesitate to say wrong with me, but if I was put in a situation where I was forced into that position, I could have been injured. That some of this movement stuff allowed me to address. And frankly, out the other side of it, I enjoy handstands, strangely enough. Like, I wasn't a gymnast growing up. I didn't have any gymnastics background. And now I've gotten pretty decent at holding handstands. And it's just something fun about being inverted on my hands, and it doesn't negatively affect my workouts. So I do that, but it's not the failure, handstand the failure. Yeah, it doesn't work like that. So I think that I have this mental continuum, and I've tried to talk it through before, but on one side, you can get to like a pure muscular contraction, power creation exercise, right? Based on biomechanics. Like, how does this muscle facilitate this joint movement? And then on the far other end, you've got pure skill activities that are all neuromuscular, that give you no exercise effect whatsoever. Darts, pool, billiards, things like that, right? And then there's the in-between. Basketball will give you a workout and exercise-like effect, but scoring 30 points doesn't mean you had a better workout than when you scored 20. In fact, you probably had an easier time. Yeah. And probably, especially in a pickup game, right? And so that's the tricky part, explaining to people that, just because something has an exercise-like effect doesn't mean that's its primary goal or purpose. and it's harder to quantify. So that's looking at exercise from a pure kind of function perspective. You also have to address the corollary, is that just because you can address the physiology and the muscle tissue doesn't mean you've improved your ability to move, and that's what we want, because the opposite, standing desks are big. I'm actually standing right now.
As am I.
As are you. Standing desks are big, but the opposite of sitting isn't standing. The opposite of sitting is movement.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So I think that that just a little attention and a little bit of light needs to be shined on that in the high intensity training community, and that's the very long form version of what those blog posts have been about. That a little attention to this will pay you big dividends down the road, and as will a high quality strength training. So as far as the amount of training I do, it's not. I mean, I did a HIIT session 2 days ago, right? So I still use it, but there are some weeks where, in spite of working in a gym, I'll train a full load of clients and immediately run off to pick up my son.
Yeah. So
then I'm left with, okay, either I have social events, or like this weekend, starting this evening, I think I have something. My wife has planned something every night or afternoon. We have her cousin's birthday. We've got a potluck we're going to. We got a bunch of things we're going to. And so if I can't get to the gym, in spite of the fact we've got 3 in town that I'm a partner of, then it's like I'm down at the park and I'm doing some chin-ups, and I'm playing, and I'm doing body weight stuff, which because you can't be as targeted, again going back to that environment to facilitate the workout, you have to do more of it. McGuff talked about it in a recent blog post where he said it's like the nail gun, the hammer, and like a crude rock. As the instrument gets less specialized, you need to do more of it, and you accept more risk in doing it. And that's just being flexible, right? You got to do this the rest of your life. If all of a sudden you had a great opportunity to work from home on a beach in Mexico, and there was no slow training facility or anywhere, the happy native fallacy, anywhere that's a beach and sunny, there's no high intensity training facility around, what would you do? Right? That to have that ability to be flexible, because who knows where life is going to take you. Mm-hmm. It shouldn't be either I only train this way because McGuff says it's perfect, or I don't train at all. Right? Because he'll tell you, MD doesn't mean magical deity. But it's like if the doctor says so, and it's great marketing, right? People listen because he's got MD after his name. Letters after a name do wonderful things to at least get people to pay attention to you for longer than a second. But I don't think the choice should be this perfection in 4 walls or nothing at all. Mm-hmm. Because a whole lot of people aren't going to be training that way.
Sure.
If that's the choice, right?
Yeah, that was a really... Sorry.
Then you explore that. Sorry, I'm...
Keep going. You're on a roll.
Have me go. So it's not. So then I, as the person who's like the arbiter of this information, if I do it, then I can explain to my clients how they might do it better, because I'm coming at it from a position of education, not only having done it, but then all of the graduate school work too. Yeah. Hey, you might want to look to doing X, Y, and Z. A and B are nice, but they come with more risk. Yeah, things like that.
Okay, cool. No, that's a great answer. I'm still slightly confused though, because it would. So there are occasions where, like you said, you don't have access to Medex or Nautilus equipment or whatever, and you have to make do with a beach or what have you. But even in that setting, and this goes back to the analogy about I do question this analogy. You probably heard it a lot, which is that you have to tell the muscle that it needs to get stronger so that it can supercompensate for next time. And and in order to trigger that, you must take that muscle to momentary muscular failure. And I'm assuming some of your workouts, you don't do that, which fascinates me. So do you still get positive adaptations?
Yes.
And why is that?
Yes, you do. So there's a couple components here. It's a continuum as anything else. One of the things that happens is those refrigerator powerlifters rarely go to failure. Part of what will allow that is if you have a heavy enough weight, the singular repetitions aren't going to stimulate a lot of muscle mass, but the cumulative volume of that strain through multiple singles or triples or whatever, never going to failure, but it's enough of a strain to cause enough microtrauma to facilitate the thickening of the contractile proteins over time, plus the genotype that would allow the person to be that big giant powerlifter. Or even if they're not giant powerlifters, there's a thickness to guys who lift heavy weights that is undeniable, partially genetic, but also partially from the type of training they do. And that leads down a rabbit hole of the two different types of hypertrophy, and that's outside the realm of what we're talking about. But long and short is, if you can accumulate enough volume with a heavy enough weight, you'll, without going to failure or chasing failure, you'll hypertrophy. And as a lot of James Steele's stuff is showing, like if you do a lot of work with a lightweight, or not, maybe not his, I think it's Fisher actually, and then some of the colleagues at McMaster up in Canada are saying the same thing, like a lot of repetitions intensely will also cause adaptive response. You won't get as much strength out of it, but that's kind of like, well, of course you won't get as much strength out of it. You're not lifting heavy thing. So it seems like hypertrophy is both genetic, it's largely facilitated by workload and genes. You can do that with higher rep sets. You can do that by getting enough work to failure, that intensity-driven model. You could also do it by using heavy weights with enough volume, but you obviously can't do it in one set, so that removes an efficiency variable, right? Yeah, very few guys can get a quality powerlifting workout in 20 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it comes with considerable risks because it is a sport at the end of the day. It's make that bar move from here to here in any means possible within our loosely defined set of parameters for form, right? And this is where the powerlifter would say they want to use as little muscle as possible to make that movement happen. That's why when the guy lays down on the bench, he arches like a Gothic cathedral. He pulls his feet under his body. He contracts his glutes and erectors. He draws his shoulders down deep in the socket, retracts his shoulder blades together as hard as possible. So now what he's done is he's created as big a barrel of chest as possible because the rules only state that the bar has to touch the chest.
Okay.
It doesn't matter where the chest is. So this is where the guys with the ultra thick chest and rib cage have a great advantage in, say, like a bench press. And then the other guys have to make up for it by like contorting their body and to create a similar effect. Yes, they get some stimulation, but it's a sport, right? It's a side effect of the point of lifting more weight.
Yeah.
Especially if they're in a weight class. Then they try not to gain too much muscle.
Right, okay.
Right. Unless they're going to go up a weight class, and then they're at the bottom of the totem pole again. So in the literature, the point of diminishing returns seems to be around 90% failure. Now, this is important because based on my experience, based on all the clients I've trained, and based on sort of the general disposition of a client, basically positive fatigue in good form, that's about right. When you have to start using a lot of English to finish it, you might have that rep in the tank. If you start contorting your body to make it happen, I'd say that for all practical purposes, you've reached failure. You've reached muscular fatigue. You're going to get all you can get out of it. What starts to happen is you near that end point. More and more effort for less and less result is what ends up happening. Without getting too technical, you see a lot of an increase in what's called rate coding, in which your muscles are firing. These motor units are on and off side by side, kind of on, off. And as you start going faster and faster, or not faster, you start getting closer and closer to fatigue, the pulsing is increasing. It's increasing. And so it's really and then by the end, you're effectively like on. Like, I can't move anymore, but the nervous system is trying to fire those motor units and trying to generate more force. This is partially, I think, why, and there's literature to back this up, why guys who use deep inroad need 7 days to recover, right? I'm going to push as hard as I can, then this guy's going to throw me a negative, and then I'm going to hold a static for 10 seconds. Because the nervous system is so just wiped out that it can't summon that force again for another 7 days. That's because what you've asked it to try and like ram through a wall, basically, right? Like this can't move anymore, and the action potential is coming down the pipe harder and harder and harder. And I mean, if you go and watch videos of some of the guys who are so very good at this, you see that the vast majority of them, they don't use force repetitions. They don't use intensity extenders. They go really hard where they hit a wall. They try to keep, part of the idea of McGuff's, stoic face or whatever, is at the moment you start going, everything else downstream wants to kick in, and then you'll start wanting to use English and bring everything else into play. I find if people can keep their face and neck out of it, then they largely keep their technique.
Yeah.
So it's not that going to failure is a bad thing or necessarily an undesirable thing in and of itself. It's that if you chase muscular failure I did this as a kid. The idea was if going to failure was good, then really going to failure will have a proportionate increase in the supercompensation.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't. It just doesn't. It's not, you've stimulated all you can stimulate by the time you can't lift that weight in good form anymore.
Okay.
And that's going to be, some people might need 7 days because of the life they live, right? Away from there. And 7 days is still great. Like I probably won't work out again in that setting until probably Monday. So 6 days for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because of the weekend I'm going to have.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's not, failure is not magic. And I'm not the first person to say this. I'm not the first person in the HIIT community to say this. But I think that early on with a trainee and someone who doesn't know what hard work is, they're stopping the game very short. They don't know, the moment it gets hard is when they quit. They don't know how to find what we'll sometimes refer to as the low gear. They don't know how to push hard without changing their technique, bringing their whole body into play. I call it refrigerator moving strength, right? Like, you don't want to hold your breath when doing this type of protocol. There's nothing wrong. If you need to do a max deadlift, then you damn well better hold your breath and perform a Valsalva maneuver because you want that spinal stabilization. But if you do that on every repetition, you open up a significant possibility for error, misuse, turning your body into a spring. Like I said, is great if you need to move a couch or a refrigerator. But if your point is to fatigue a region of musculature, then you don't want to do that. You want to try to only use the space or the muscles that are involved in that movement, right? Yeah. So there's a functional reason, but there's also a metabolic and work reason. And I find that people early on need to be pushed to failure because they don't know what real failure is. Mm-hmm. When you have someone who's experienced with that, they need to be less pushed to failure. It's just let them go to failure, don't chase failure, and don't really get hung up on that, I didn't push as hard at failure. Well, you couldn't lift it. That's good enough.
Okay. Just carrying on from that and probing a little bit further, this is going to be probably pretty difficult to answer, but I appreciate that high-intensity strength training, it can be very prescriptive, and depending on the individual's goals. But in your view, what is the most effective protocol to generate strength and hypertrophy?
So one of the things I try to explain to people is that something like a high-intensity training protocol, like a body by science type component, will get you pretty damn close to whatever your genes are going to be. Mm-hmm. There's a number of studies on this, and this is kind of and I can't say Holy Grail without sounding like a Monty Python character. They're like, it's the Holy Grail it is the Holy Grail because what of exercise physiology is this kind of universal test to determine what the individual about ready to embark on this exercise journey, is capable of getting from your efforts. There's a great BBC documentary called The Truth About Exercise.
Yeah,
I'm sure you've
great documentary, yeah.
Great documentary, right? And so the guys in the north there, their test is able to determine quite accurately if someone will see an increase in VO2 max, a measure of oxygen consumption and rough work capacity from training. And of course, Mosley was like at the bottom. He was not going to be a responder. And you saw that, like his time to fatigue in the test improved, but the total amount of oxygen he could consume and do work with did not change one iota with this cycle protocol they used. Mm-hmm. And there are studies out there where you have 250 people, all between the age of about 25 and 30, on the exact same training protocol. And you have about 70% see some improvement in strength and muscle. About 20% don't really see any change either way. They might gain a little bit of muscle mass, but no strength, or a little bit of strength, no muscle mass. And then you have some people who actually get weaker and lose muscle tissue, as measured either by DEXA scan, dual X-ray, kind of a full body scan that differentiates bone mineral density. For your viewers who might not know, it differentiates bone from lean tissue from fat mass. And it's from a one-stop shop. It's kind of considered the gold standard.
Sure.
Or they'll use something like a bod pod, which is called air plethysmography, which basically measures a known volume cylinder and then at a given weight, and a given body composition based on some math, you probably have about this lean tissue. And it's pretty accurate against itself, too. I've done back-to-back BOD-POD and DEXA scan a number of times, and they're pretty close.
Is the DEXA more accurate, though, right?
The DEXA is slightly more accurate, but it can be fooled also, right? I mean, it's really sensitive to water fluctuations. So I think they're up to now 6 compartments. So what they mean by 6 compartments is you could eventually, some of the best studies will measure bone mass, dry muscle mass, intramuscular water, or intracellular water, extracellular water.
That's incredible.
Fat mass, and I forget what the 6th compartment is. Right. But it's expensive. You can't do it in one go. And it's kind of like, well, so what? If you look good and you like the way you look, so what about the body fat percentage? Like, it's important in a research-driven kind of way, as in my example here, in which some people actually lose muscle mass from strength training. So the Holy Grail is this idea that you could prescribe to someone their expected outcomes from any training modality, whether it be sort of endurance focus, which is a conditioning discussion. It's fine. It's better than nothing. But here's the thing. Most people don't have the wherewithal to gain a lot of oxygen consuming capabilities above their kind of genetic level, right? So Lance Armstrong, the now villain, but former hero, I mean, his measured at his peak post-cancer recovery, VO2 max, was something like 84. Now, this is important. Humans, we're measured on a scale of 100. When I did a VO2 max, mine was 50 with no cardiorespiratory training. And that's considered excellent, right? On the ACSM, American College of Sports Medicine, like measures for my age, that was considered excellent. And if I put a lot of work into it, trying to just drive up my VO2 max with certain cardiorespiratory focus protocols, I might be able to push it to like 58.
Sure.
Right? Or 60.
Yeah.
Because you can only gain about maybe 10 of sort of baseline as an adult, which tells you that I was not built to be an endurance athlete. Like, already, there's no hope on earth of me pushing that thing to 80.
Yeah.
Which is almost a prerequisite to be a really good endurance athlete. But this is back to my point, which is, if we had the Holy Grail test, it like, you, Lawrence, based on this blood test, we could tell you that, you might hypertrophy a little bit, but your blood pressure is going to respond great. Your blood glucose is going to drop like a rock, and your resting heart rate is going to drop. You kind of have appropriate expectations. Then you might actually stay training longer. You might actually pick safer things because you know what to look for. And I think that what happens is people will go looking for muscle and hypertrophy, and they'll get it. I've got, it's on my website. You can see just how skinny I was in high school. I'm significantly more muscular now, and leaner. But I didn't turn into the Hulk, no matter how hard I tried. I have a line where, my legs were skinny when I had a 400-pound box squat. It's just the way I'm built. They just were. I mean, I was using my hips and back because that's how my levers are. Or when I was deadlifting 455 for 5, I mean, I was still long and lanky, and that's kind of how it was. So even though I've gotten much more muscular, had I known that that wasn't going to be the thing that training primarily provides me, I might have probably saved myself a little wear and tear from all the powerlifting I did. So that's a long convoluted answer to say, I'm not sure there's a perfect modality. I'm sure that based on the literature, that moderate rep ranges done with a focused intensity close to fatigue will get you really close to whatever perfection is. And as far as a frequency is concerned, if you're not going the deep end road, you can tolerate twice a week. I mean, there's just no reason, if your goal is hypertrophy, like if that's your absolute goal. If you're kind of, that's not your thing anymore, and you can handle a slower increase in strength and muscle, Once a week, strength training is fine, supplemented with a bunch of other stuff you'd rather be doing. Right? Strength is a bit like the foundation of a house. Get it? If you start with a really good foundation, you can do whatever you want on top of it. But for some people, the foundation's the point. Like, they want strength, they want hypertrophy at all costs. But most people are going to gain a lot in the front end, and then they're fighting harder and harder for less and less as their training career goes on. And you have to be able to ask, is that worth it? Right? Do you want that thing? Because it doesn't happen accidentally for most people. I've had a couple clients where they had the gift and they didn't care, right? It's like, I take for granted being tall because I've always been tall. You know, I never had to wish to be tall, or wonder what it was like, you know? And so these guys, I had one guy, he'd show up for like 10 weeks, once every couple years. He'd train once a week. He'd put on about 12 pounds of muscle, and then he'd go back to being a computer guy.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he was an IT consultant. And then these are the guys who complain like, my legs get too big with strength training.
Yeah.
You know, we're all like, oh, we should all be so lucky to be burdened with such a problem.
Yeah. No, it's
so it's kind of how it works, right? Those of us who don't have the gift really wish we had it.
Yeah.
And those who have it rarely use it or want it. You know, it's not, or they're indifferent to it.
Yeah. Skyler, can you hear me okay, by the way? I'm just checking.
Yeah, I can hear.
No, because I think that the girlfriend is streaming some junk, crap on telly, so I'm just conscious of that in the back room.
No. I can hear you. You're not choppy. You're not cutting out or anything of that nature.
Good stuff. Okay, just checking. No, you raised some really good points there. I'm just going to shift gears slightly. I just want to ask you some other questions.
Sure.
Okay. Just talking about nutrition, there's this whole debate around calories in, calories out. And I wanted to know what your thoughts are around the importance of macronutrients, because the reason I ask this is because there's a lot of people that talk about low carbohydrate. You don't want to have too much carbohydrate in your diet because it will spike your insulin and put you in fat storage mode.
Sure.
And there's people that say, calories do ultimately matter. If you have, you could be eating high fat, but if you're having too much fat, you're still going to get fat. And then you got guys like Dave Asprey, who I'm sure I think you know Dave, don't you?
I know Dave. I met Dave, yeah. Dave was at his biohackers conference back in October.
Yeah, so you got someone like Dave who says, I ate 4,000 calories a day for 2 years and I got a six-pack. So I'm really, when I heard that, I was a little bit like, well, maybe, but you're also only one person. That's anecdotal. Where's the evidence, kind of thing?
Right.
Big fan of Dave, so not hating on him or anything.
Sure. Healthy skepticism's a good thing.
Absolutely. But I just wanted your views. What do you think about that whole the calories out, calories in debate?
So you raised 3 points. I'm going to try and touch on them in order. One was the idea of sort of calories as the ultimate arbiter of body weight. Mm-hmm. The second was... I could sum it up as it sounds like if it fits your macronutrients, then it's okay to eat. Did I kind of that? Maybe you've heard that. You'll see the abbreviation IIFYM. If it fits your macronutrients, then that's all that matters. Which is kind of a function of calories, total calories as matters. And then the third component is basically insulin, fat storage, and caloric level. Does that sound about right? Are those three points that sound like I touched on?
So I asked you a really convoluted question, so thanks.
That's fine. No, I'm just making sure I touch on all of them. Okay. So the first component is, yes, calories matter, but if we're talking purely about body weight, you could get lean on a diet of cake and Skittles. The problem is that the satiety mechanisms, the way in which we as human beings, our physiology predicts future nutritive value and satisfaction, you basically have to be hung up by your thumbs in a dungeon and fed through a funnel in order to make that work long term. This, so yes, you could be like these software engineers living on Soylent and having all of your caloric needs met through chemically produced vitamins, minerals, and all it says that you need in a biochemistry book if you were a human living in stasis based on your height and weight. That is possible I mean, Lord knows there's enough studies where person A says they're only eating X amount of calories, and they bring them into a lab, and they live in the lab, and then the lab feeds them that many calories, and lo and behold, they lose weight, right? The problem is, unless you're super anal retentive tracking your calories, people just aren't very good at it. I mean, and in fact, lots of these nutrition studies are based on like retrospective surveys. So Lawrence, tell me how many servings of grain you ate 3 months ago. I mean, who knows, right? It's almost, and then you're aware of what's called the Hawthorne effect. I think it's right, the Hawthorne effect.
Yes.
Where you're being observed in survey form, so you're going to project the best version of yourself, right?
Yeah. So
you're going to lie. I mean, you're going to at least fib. And most people. I mean, I give you an example. 3 months ago, most people don't know what they ate a week ago today.
I don't know what I ate yesterday.
yeah. Or and unless they're keeping a food log, then they're not the people whom these surveys are built for. They are already the outlier. Okay. Number 2 is that the whole 3,500 calories equals a pound of fat rule is true, but it's short-sighted. In fact, there was and I'll send it to you. You can link it to your viewers.
Great.
There was a study that basically the origins of 500 calories, or a pound of fat is 3,500 calories, goes back to like 1930.
Okay.
And it's not wrong. Did you read Good Calories, Bad Calories?
I haven't read it yet. I've read Why We Get Fat, the one after that.
Okay, so Why We Get Fat is just a cleaner, easier to digest version of Good Calories, Bad Calories. Okay. So one of the points you might remember he made is that he said, okay, if the difference in our weight gain should be what it says that it is on a caloric basis per day, then we should all be hundreds of pounds over fat. Right? He basically makes the idea that if you just do a pure physics math measure, then we should all be much fatter based on the change in caloric intake between 30 years ago and now. And he uses that to kind of prop up the idea that it's a change in carbohydrates that is helping facilitate some of that. And I'll get to that insulin idea here in a second. Sure. Well, both coming and going, or gaining and losing, our body has compensation mechanisms to keep us from gaining too quickly or losing too quickly. And that's what this actual, the piece that I'll send over to you is, that if we put ourselves down 500 calories a day, instead of losing 24 pounds of fat in, I think, 3 or 4 months, like the math would indicate, we end up losing that in a year. Because the lower we go, a couple things happen. We require less calorie. I mean, our metabolism lowers just as a function of body weight. We get more efficient at doing certain things. And it's all more deeply explained in this article. The long and short of it is our body's really good about keeping ourselves from losing too aggressively, simultaneously keeping us from gaining too aggressively. This is why some of the best kind of long-term diet studies have people lose a little bit of weight and then fight to maintain it so that the hormonal milieu adjusts to the new fat mass, because fat is an endocrine organ. Fat is actually secreting things that are letting the rest of the body know that you're not starving and dying. And if you aggressively try to lose fat, then the whole hormonal influence gets thrown out of whack, and your body will start to make, the idea of starvation mode is a little short-sighted. Like people go, I'm starving, I didn't eat since yesterday. That's not starvation. But there's some validity to the fact that there are hormonal changes that come with too steep a decrease in calories that makes it significantly harder to lose weight over time. And so as far as insulin is concerned, that's not wrong, that if insulin's up, you're not freeing fatty acids for use, for energy. But your body is, but the corollary isn't true. So it's important to understand that substrate level utilization, which is, I think people have this idea that sort of, I'm putting fat in my body, therefore that is the thing that's going to be used. That's not quite how bioenergetics works. Your body, for example, all of the fat stored in your fat tissue is the same variety of fat, which I think is palmitic acid, if all of my master's biochemistry, because I don't get asked that question very often, the exact type of saturated fat that our fat is. So if a nutritionist or dietitian jumps down my throat, I'm going off of memory. And I think it's palmitic acid. So whatever, it doesn't matter what you take in. It could be a monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat. It could be medium triglycerides. Your body is going to eventually convert it and store it as palmitic acid in your fat cells. That's just the way it works. Similarly, yes, there is some amount of input. Like if you're eating carbohydrates, you can more readily use it for energy, but not locally. Like your muscle tissues don't use it nearly as well. Depending on the type of carbohydrate you take in, it will preferentially fill the liver versus muscle glycogen. And there's all sorts of biochemical things that are going on. So if you're not exercising, though, your body is capable of using all substrates kind of at the same time in varying amounts. When insulin is high, yes, it's harder to get the fatty acids out, but you could spike insulin 1,000 times a day and eat no calories, and you'd lose weight. Right? If you could somehow just give yourself, you'd pass out somewhere at some point because your blood sugar would go to zero, but you could lose weight because your body would find a way to liberate the fatty acids. Similarly, you can be in a zero insulin environment. There's a little protein called ASP, which is, I think it's acetyl stimulating protein, that will store fatty acids in the total absence of insulin. It doesn't need it to get the job done. Your body's redundant. Your body has multiple ways of accomplishing the same task, whether that's fat storage, fat liberation, carbohydrate usage, carbohydrate storage. There's more than one way to skin a cat when it comes to our body, which is part of the survival of our species. We can get the job done. It's not the right term, but our physiology is as omnivorous as we are. It can take multiple things to get the job done. Just like whatever we put down our neck, we can turn into almost anything we need. Our body can take whatever it has available and keep us living on to tomorrow within reason.
Yeah.
So 4,000 calories a day, if you were active enough, and you still had a deficit relative to your energy consumption, of course. John Berardi talked about this years ago, and he called it G-flux, which he hasn't really touched on recently because it's kind of a duh, which is, if you're burning more than you're taking in, no matter the level, then you're going to lose weight. Now, as far as Dave and 4,000 calories and this and that, it's the same thing. It's a bit like it's a bit like what Tom Naughton says about the Fathead, or in his Fathead movie about Supersize Me. It's like, show us the diet journals, right? Like, show us your 4,000 calories for this duration of time, because it's a nice round number. You wouldn't estimate it. There are some people who could do that. There are some people who can, another BBC documentary, Why We Don't Get Fat. There are some people whose physiology will fight back in a number of ways. They will start to, they'll get nauseous eating too much. They will just preferentially put on muscle tissue if they overeat. Like you force feed them, their metabolism goes way up. Why? Because they gained muscle.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Right, they just do, and they don't really look any different, but they're 20 pounds heavier. It's like, well, what's the deal? Well, they gain muscle mass. Yeah. And then there are other people who do get fat, but the moment you stop force feeding them, they come right back down the size.
Yeah.
Right? Which is a really long way of saying calories matter, macronutrients matter, micronutrients matter, consistency more than anything matters. Because the longest lived, leanest cultures on Earth, they don't count calories, they don't count macronutrients, they don't have perfect diets, right? So the Sardinian men in the kind of mountainous region of Sardinia who live longer than women, which is really unusual.
Okay.
They have like a diet of pecorino cheese, goat's milk, wild greens, meat, but not in large portions, wine that they make at home. And so the original, the whole impetus for the blue zones. Are you familiar with the blue zones or the term the blue zones? Okinawa, Sardinia, Ikaria, and the Aegean
There's one in
Sea.
California, isn't there, somewhere?
And that one's an interesting one. I'll talk about that in just a second.
Okay.
And then the Nicoyan Peninsula of Costa Rica. So the original blue zone is Sardinia. And they went back later and parsed out the statistics, and originally, like, Dan Buettner, the guy who's managed to monetize the blue zones to the nth degree, and he's doing good work. It seems like he's monetized it. That makes him a bad guy. No, he's done a lot of good work. He's gotten a whole bunch of communities to, like, build more biking and hiking, biking, walking ability, organize these Moai walking groups and change plate size. I mean, all these really good things from it. But he's managed to monetize the studies really well through his work through National Geographic. When they went, and so he was like, it's the polyphenols and the antioxidants in the wine. That's artery scrubbing. It's like, well, I mean, wine's great, but there's not enough of either of those things, whether it's resveratrol or antioxidants in it, to do jack shit. I mean, what it is any food stuff, unless you're like have a peanut allergy or you're truly celiac and these things harm you now, they might have a drug-like effect, but only done consistently enough over a long enough period of time, right? That's how it's not like, if I guzzled some corn oil today, I might feel bad because I just drank a bunch of oil, but I'm probably not going to die a week earlier as a result of it. But if I use corn oil in every single meal for many, many years, that's going to be problematic in the long term. It's going to be a pro-inflammatory environment. In a acute short term, it's just not, there's nothing doing. It's just not, your body, again, is very flexible, but you keep bombarding it with the bad stuff and it accumulates. Similarly, the thing that these guys found when they went back and parsed statistics, it wasn't the wine, it wasn't the pecorino cheese, it wasn't any of that crap. 3 things. The grade of the terrain surrounding their home, because if you've got to walk up and down, you have to maintain balance and leg strength, and muscle mass is most strongly correlated thing with longevity and functional ability as we age that there is. Number 2 was the pastoralism, because it's a herding, shepherding Bronze Age culture. So again, that facilitates the movement. And the third thing was how far they had to walk to work and town, right? So it was all exercise things that had the strongest correlation of these longevity benefits. Similarly, with the Okinawans, it's like, yes, there's some evidence based on some other study of these natives in Brazil that a lot of these long-lived Okinawans, like, they basically went through World War II and occupation from Imperial Japan, like seriously stressful shit when they were in their 20s. And there's some evidence to suggest that if you go through just gnarly stress in your formative years, you somehow maintain a resiliency, perhaps in the fact that you've seen what real stress is. Everything else is not too bad.
So right? You have minimal stress.
Your perspective is perpetually adjusted.
Yeah.
I mean, they live on like sweet potatoes and wild greens, and they're this big around, and yet but what they don't do is they never retire, so they always have something to do. They have a lifestyle that facilitates constant walking, going back to pastoralism idea from the Sardinians, and they have great social support networks. If you have a reason to get up in the morning, you do, right? I mean, and so that facilitates longevity. But if you look at their diet, it's like decently high in carbohydrates. The fat that they do use is almost always lard, right? And if you're anyone else, if outside of the primal community, you'll be like, saturated fat, you'll give a hand-waving explanation as to why they're protected by it. But there's a lot of saturated fat when they use it. Almost everything's cooked in lard. It's just not what we would consider a perfect diet by Asprey's definition, by most people's definition. It's an adequate diet. It's a good enough diet, and they've been doing it their whole life. Yeah. Similarly, the Seventh-day Adventists in California, they aren't isolated. Oh, and here's the other thing. There's a certain equatorial isolationism in all of these blue zones, with the exception of the Adventists, but I'll get to that in a second. The Sardinians it's an isolated portion of an isolated island. Ikaria is isolated from Greece. Okinawa is the bottom of an archipelago off Japan. The Nicoyan Peninsula in Costa Rica, up until recently, was a pain in the ass to get to. It was just like, all right, great, now you got to drive through this forest, and then the jungle, and then you got to figure out how to get across these rivers. Oh, and now you're here. So there's a bit of what we call a gene flow problem, which is they might very well have genetic factors that are conducive to longevity because there has not been a lot of intermingling of outsiders kind of changing the genetic structure. There's a island in northern Italy in which, because of the mountainous terrain, these individuals, 2 people with a double deletion of a apolipoprotein, basically changed a large portion of the population over many, many decades, so that on average, they have a lower HDL count, higher triglycerides, but nobody has heart disease because they have this mutant apolipoprotein that just, it's like the best heart disease preventing molecule we know of. They've even tried to synthesize it. Of course, the problem is then you have to have a person sitting there and getting injections on a regular basis rather than popping a statin. But it wasn't magic. It was because nobody could get in, and two people happen to have this double deletion. It's a bit like the Belgian blue bulls. It's not that Belgium produces giant cattle. It's that animal husbandry that kept breeding the biggest animals so that they look like the Arnold Schwarzenegger of bulls grazing on grass, just like the Longhorns here in Texas, which through no fault of their own all became really skinny because the terrain basically required it. Like an animal that doesn't put on a lot of mass was going to was going to eat a lot less. If you're going to eat a lot less, droughts and dry conditions weren't going to kill as many of them, right? Yeah. So the Seventh-day Adventists are interesting because they are culturally isolated, right? Seventh-day Adventist is it's a conservative Baptist, if I recall correctly, and so they have very strict dietary, vegetarian to vegan type diets. But it's not junk food, right? Like a lot of people who are vegetarian are still eating their like frozen like chemical patties and French fries and just a lot of junk food. My first girlfriend was a vegetarian, but it just meant she ate shit is what it meant. So there are some people who are vegan, or like my sister-in-law, she's vegetarian unless she knows like exactly where it came from. Right, like, oh, it was on this ranch and it was raised there its entire life and it was humanely slaughtered. Okay, then she'll consider eating it. So it's like selective. It's very political and sort of animal welfare. Cool. And fish that this aquarium in San Francisco says is safe and it's not being overfarmed. Great. But most of what she eats is like plants and high quality raw dairy and things of that nature. And so these Adventists tend to be closer to that. So they're getting adequate nutrition. They have a huge social support network because the entire community is basically Seventh-day Adventist, right? An entire city of Seventh-day Adventists, and everybody knows somebody, and if you've got a problem, somebody could probably help you out. That's going to help reduce a lot of your stressors. There's less of a gene flow because it's kind of an impenetrable wall. If you're not that conservative, you're probably not going to want to live there. You're just not, or at least you won't have as deep a community, right? So, but finally, they've done longitudinal studies on the diet of the Adventists and the diet of California Mormons, which have similar observation of the Sabbath, similar outdoor requirements almost, where it's like you're going to get out in nature, you're going to enjoy nature because it was made for you. But they don't have the same meat. They don't have the same meat restriction, right? The wording is different. In like the Adventists, it's like you're practically a vegetarian, whereas in Mormonism, it's like don't abuse meat, like basically don't be a carnivore.
Right.
They have their lifespan is above the standard Californian, is about the same. Right? So if it was meat killing them, it's doing a really bad job.
Right.
Right? If you're living 9 years longer than your average Californian, whether you're if you're a vegetarian or you're consuming meat, then it ain't the meat. Right? The meat's not killing you.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit off topic. But
that's interesting.
But it's more to the point of a lot of these things is like it's like I tell my clients, good enough is good enough if you do it long enough. That's largely the point of bringing those up, is that a diet that's adequate in the right macro and micronutrients, is not too caloric, has a variety of makeups, because none of these diets are exactly the same. They might have some self-similarities, but none of them are exactly the same. They're not eating magic foods. They're getting enough of the stuff they need to survive. They're not over-consuming junk. And they are, because of tradition and culture and availability, doing that most of their life. And that seems to be the best way to go about things nutritionally. Like get it mostly right and do it long enough rather than constantly fiddling with things.
Yeah.
Because it's going to stress you out. It's a bit of the paradox of choice. Great book, by the way, The Paradox of Choice. The more choices you have, up to a certain point, right? You feel like, this is better, I'm getting better, I'm having more, this is more satisfactory, and all of a sudden you're tyrannized by the choices. All of a sudden you have this expectation that I should be able to find perfection because I've got 1,000 choices. And when you merely find the best you've ever experienced, that's not good enough.
Yeah.
So I think this is what tends to happen, especially with the internet. I'm as guilty as anybody of doing this, where being just merely very healthy and lean and pretty strong suddenly isn't good enough. And you really stress yourself out and use a lot of brain power that could be used for more productive things, trying to make magic happen around the edges. And the king has, the king has no clothes at that point. You're just not going to find it. There's no magic thing you've been missing that's going to suddenly lead to rapid body composition. It's a bit like Richard Nicolai, Free the Animal. I don't know if you ever read his stuff.
No, I don't.
He's an interesting character, and he's very abrasive. But he's sort of come full circle after years of jerking off about all this nutrition stuff. He's like, Brad Pilon had it right all those years ago. Don't be a glutton. Eat mostly good food. Fast occasionally. That basically covers all the bases. I'd say that's right. Whole food and close to its natural packaging as possible. Some days, if you don't feel like eating much meat, eat more like a plant-based diet. Some days, if you want to be a carnivore, go right ahead. Occasionally fast. I think that covers most people's bases. The problem is, in our world, it's funny, you tell people eat real food, they have no idea what that means. They're like, that's complicated. I go, what's complicated about fruits, nuts, seeds, meats, tubers, berries, organ meats periodically? But it's just the cultural component of Western society where it's like, do I get vitamin C from that? Is it healthy? It's that whole, if it's making a health claim, you probably shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah.
But the corollary people don't understand then is like, well, then what do I eat? They just don't know. So you have to walk people through this very slowly. And it's something that we as a business, I built out of some of my graduate education. There's lots of good habits out there, that are parsed across all these cultures, right? Whether it's slowing down one's eating, stopping at 80% full, both of which come from the Okinawans. Before every meal, they sit down and they go, hara hachi bu, which means stop eating at 80% full, roughly. The corollary of that, because it's a Confucian society, right? Food is medicine. They say 8/10 supports the man, 2/10 supports the doctor.
Right.
Right. So when you're a glutton, you become unhealthy, and then you make your doctor wealthy. So effectively, all of their life, they've been practicing mild caloric restriction.
That's really interesting.
And that's beneficial also.
Yeah.
So we built this program where it was like, how do I walk people through some of these habits that have evidence either in the health education literature, in traditional literature or traditional cultures like blue zones, with a kind of a framework around it that is conducive to producing results. And so the one I got out of health education in graduate school was social cognitive theory, which is used to improve condom usage and stop people from using hard drugs and a variety of other things. So improving nutrition habits is really not that hard in using this framework. And we had some good success with that, right? This idea that habits are hard to form, but habits take no willpower. These people eat the way they eat because they don't have to willpower their way through it on a daily basis, because the habit does it for them. The habit's like a wind-up-and-go machine. The trick is formulating good habits, teaching people what real food is, so that when they're done, they have habits they can take with them anywhere, no matter what foodstuffs they have available, and eat in a way that is conducive to health.
Yeah.
But that's hard to do. People just don't know how. So that's why we had to build a program to do that.
No, I think that's great, and you've answered these questions so well and in such a different way that I'm really glad, because it's going to give a completely different perspective on all these things. So it's something really original for people to listen to. I'm just going to ask you a few more questions, because I appreciate time's ticking on.
Sure.
Let's just have a look. So, okay, I'm going to pick and choose here. You've mentioned some really good books already, which will definitely go in the show notes. But is there any other books that you want to mention, books that you think people must read that you perhaps haven't mentioned already, on the topic of health and fitness, or anything else, actually?
So there's a relatively new book from a writer named Gretchen Rubin, and I think that's right, as I look here on the internet to make sure I'm not butchering her last name. The book's called Better Than Before.
Okay. And
it's all about habit formation, right? What does literature say on habit? Yeah, Gretchen Rubin. What does the literature say about habits? What does the literature say about forming habits? and how can you do that better? Because the thing that you do without having to force yourself to do it every time is the thing you're going to do the longest.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really good read. Part of I still have a kind of a human ecology, paleoanthropological look to all of this stuff. And there's a textbook, there's a website, if you want to go relatively old school, that's evfit, evfit.com. Mm-hmm. And Keith Thomas, he's an Australian who was writing about this stuff years and years and years and years ago, before a lot of people who are in this kind of field. And he takes a bigger view, not just like, hey, you human animal, you should be eating this, but why that's better for your community and kind of a bigger picture if that's something that you're interested in. Cool. And then he also has links going way back, like some of the stuff talking about the evolutionary mismatch by a human ecologist named Stephen Boyden back in like the 1970s. Lots of good reading going on. It's a very old looking website, but he's not monetizing it, so I didn't have to keep it pretty. And let's see, I mentioned a couple other, I mentioned Paradox of Choice, I mentioned The Blue Zones. Is there any other book I would, it's funny because I know better, but it's still a great book, just because the book Born to Run, I read it like 3 times. I read it like 3 times in 3 weeks, only recently. Really? Yeah, because
you don't think we are born to run.
He writes a good yarn. Here's the thing. Born with the ability to run that you should check in on periodically would probably have been a more accurate title, but it doesn't sell books. And it's like the Taru Amara or Born to Run, because Copper Canyon has because if you were keeping yourself far away from the conflict, your villages are going to be far away and you got to carry yourself by your legs. Okay, so you got to get, you as a culture valuing running, thinking of it as noble, would get pretty good at running, as they did. And then it's a good yarn nonetheless, and some of the paleoanthropology that is making an argument for the idea as humans having evolved a number of a variety of traits that allow us to run long distances. Our legs have a lot of recoil tendons in them. We are, in fact, very slow. Like my dogs could outrun me in a sprint. We don't buffer lactic acid extremely well. Going back to that VO2 max argument. Lance Armstrong's pretty good, VO2 max of 80. Your average dog's VO2 max is like 200.
Jesus. And
it's because animals can produce bicarbonate and buffer this acidic environment in real time. We can't do that like they can.
How do you know this stuff?
Yeah. What was that?
How do you know all this stuff? It's insane.
It's reading, and it's just lots of that brain turning on thing. Graduate school, actually. So they have horse treadmills. Look it up, like horse on a treadmill. So here's the other thing. Here's a little factoid for your viewers. So this idea of why do people get addicted to exercise? People go, the endorphins. Endorphins are bullshit. Because it's like saying magic. It was just a catch-all kind of phrase. What it is endocannabinoids. So humans, dogs, and horses, you get us running, you keep us running below our lactate threshold, and eventually we start secreting cannabinoids in our brain in response to the exercise. Dogs do it, humans do it, horses do it. We all are capable of running. So it's literally weed internally, right? Internal marijuana. Ferrets don't do it. Marmots don't do it. They don't run naturally. They sort of do this fast walk thing. And so endocannabinoids are what get people addicted to exercise. And it should be then then follow the next train of thought. How many feel-good stories are there about some junkie turned distance runner? And people go, oh, that's great, right? He's no longer a junkie. No, he's still a junkie. He's getting high on his own supply.
Yeah.
He's just doing it to himself, or she's just doing it to herself.
Sure.
You lock him in a hotel room for 3 minutes, you watch him claw the door down and go run laps in a parking lot because they need a hit. Only now it's socially acceptable. It's exercise.
That's crazy. Because for so long I've heard people say, it's such a throwaway comment. It's cliche, isn't it? Oh, you release endorphins when you exercise.
You release endorphins.
And it's like you hear people say it, and it's like you're just saying that because everyone says that. And there's so many statements like that that just do not ring true, and that's absolutely fascinating that you happen to explain that.
Well, I thank one of my professors, because his whole point was just like, show me the biomarker. And nobody could, like, for so long. Only within the past, I want to say 3 or 4 years has this thing been discovered. And I'm surprised it hasn't been trumpeted from the rooftops. Like, it's weed, motherfucker! Like, it obviously isn't, because it's coming from up here. But it's the same receptors are being hit.
Sure.
And then there's crosstalk between the cannabinoid receptor and the opiate receptors. And so that facilitates this whole addictive. If you're already an addict, it's very easy to get addicted to exercise.
Yeah.
But somehow that's okay. It's okay from a perspective of, like, you're still a contributing member of society. But then I think about the long-term joint implications, right?
Yeah.
Right? Like, at the end of the day, nobody cares about, and this will be my last little comment, like, every 4 years we care about a 30-year-old who can run fast. But you want to set the news on fire, be a 90-year-old who can get out of your own way and still be standing upright and still not be drawing your words. People get really excited about that shit.
Yeah.
Just super excited about it. Which tells you the expectation of society is that when you're young, you should have function, and as you get older, you should retire and do nothing. That's kind of this global expectation, and it's bollocks.
Yes.
It's bullshit.
Couldn't agree more.
The idea is that a lot of people break themselves before they can actually experience all of that. It's not sexy to say moderation in all things. Your exercise should be intense. The moderation is you don't do it at a high frequency. Your movement should be regular. The moderation is you don't do that at a high intensity.
Yeah.
The people who do high frequency, high intensity movement are gymnasts. And they eventually stop being gymnasts.
Yes. Yeah, I read your blog post about that.
Right. You don't get both.
Yeah. Just a quick question. This is jumping way back, and I regret it if I didn't ask you this. And this is kind of selfish, but I think a lot of people doing, say, Big 5 every 7 days want this question to be asked. So if I did Big 5 to momentary muscular failure, super slow, once a week, and then I thought, maybe 3 days after I thought, I just fancy doing a ton of push-ups and some chin-ups, is that going to be detrimental?
Probably not.
Okay.
I think here's the thing with that Big 5. The point should be to add weight to the bar on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I like micro-loading. I think, that is on like a Medix piece or a Nautilus piece, adding, a pound or two, depending on the size of the exercise, or, half to 1 kilo on a regular basis. And whether that's weekly or biweekly or even monthly, because your muscles produce strain and you only get it to produce more strain with adding little bits of weight.
Okay.
That'll take you a long way. And then the push-ups and chin-ups and all that, so all that fancying doing that's the movement stuff, right? Like, I don't think it's going to speed up your result in the short term, maybe, but not in the long term.
Oh, we got a visitor.
Yeah, it's my next trainer coming in, so I gotta hop off here.
No worries,
but,
no worries. Last question then. Sure. Is how do people contact you?
You can go to Skyler. You can go to SkylerTanner.com. That's SkylerTanner.com. Or you could shoot me, and then that's got my contact information up in the contact thread, and you can get me anyway that way. So that's the easy way to do it, and it gives you multiple ways of accessing me.
Perfect. Look, Skyler, I really appreciate today. You can talk a lot, but it's good. And I've only asked you really 3 or 4 big questions, and you just absolutely unloaded loads of awesome information. I'd love to do a part 2 at some point if we could.
Sure, we could definitely do that at some point.
Excellent, good stuff.
And then all you got to find is 2 good questions, and I'll fill it out.
Exactly. Well, cheers, Skyler. Have a great day. I'll talk to you soon.
Cheers, Lawrence.
All the best.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.